Thank you so much, panel. Moving to the next session. The title is A Smart Electronic City. It's presented by Ashwin Mahesh, who's the co-founder for social technology lab, Mapunity. Ashwin is a technologist and a public policy researcher who studies the way cities are growing in India and the implications for managing them. He co-founded and leads the social technology lab Mapunity, which works to apply technology to tackle development challenges. And in 2006, Mapunity built the first transport information system for a major city in India. So let's please put our hands together for Ashwin.
Oops, it's a little louder than I thought. Good morning, everybody. I know we're coming up to lunch, and I will try to take you through this quickly. And as has been repeatedly pointed out, this is essentially a session on technology. And so that's not to say that the other things don't exist. If you want to talk about policy, politics, public problem solving, citizenship, I'd be happy to do all of that. But in this session, let's focus on this. I run a social technology lab called Mapunity. Many of you know this. We've done all sorts of things over the years, trying to build technologies for urban management, urban citizenship, and urban public problem solving. If you look at cities, what you find are the major deficits are some broad buckets of it. Silos in public administration, departments that don't really talk to each other. And then there's a talent and training deficit, that a lot of people are hired into public administration and not really given the opportunity or even the expected to constantly retrain themselves and keep themselves skilled in a way that they can actually perform their roles. There are a lot of people who have also been sort of appointed to the wrong job, engineers appointed to town planning functions and things like that. And it seems like the whole planning of the city is wrong to begin with, and everything else that we're trying to do on top of that is sort of band-aid on top of a deep sort of a heart surgery type situation. And finally, there's this big problem which I call only by government, the thinking that Sarkar must solve all these problems. This is a problem, this is an unusual thing, because if there's one thing that citizens and the government agree on, it's this. Government thinks only we should solve the problems, and even the citizens think only the government should solve the problems. It's odd, but for very different reasons. Government thinks if we only solve the problems, we can keep those buggers out. Citizens think, why should I do anything? I already paid my taxes. Somebody else should solve this problem. But it's an odd synergy that sort of exists in this thing. But corresponding to those deficits are a set of things that automatically sort of you say, what's smart is overcoming the deficits. That's what's smart. And what is overcoming those deficits? We integrate the silos, build internal capacity, reboot governance, and build collaborative approaches to solutions. All these are sort of very standard things that would come out of identifying the problem and say. But then comes the question, who should do all these things? I mean, if you take the first question, integrate the silos, you would have noticed that there is no department of integration in government. In any level of government, there is no department of integration. So the idea that some government entity is going to integrate the silos is just wishful. Nobody's going to do that. Nowhere in the world is there an integration department in government. The idea of integration has to be rethought, therefore. Similarly with other things, internal capacity, governance structure. And as I noticed in one of the earlier sessions, somebody said, the smart story so far has been about replacing paper silos with technology-enabled silos, which is all right. It's sort of more gadgets, more sales of gadgets and things like that, but hasn't really produced outcomes that we care about. There's also a lot of outsourcing that's been going on. The government says, well, we can't do this, therefore we'll get somebody else to do it. And the net result of that is that the government continues to be able to not do it. And it has to perpetually rely on an outsourced solution for a lot of things that it wants to do. And then the solution providers, somebody asked about what technology companies can do. If there's one thing I blame technology companies for, is that they've stayed away from governance and citizenship enabling technologies. with the fear that governments will not want these things. And therefore, if we build citizenship enabling technologies and governance enabling technologies, then we'll have no chance of getting any contracts from governments that don't care about these kinds of things. So fundamentally, companies have chosen the market over the outcome. And maybe that's part of the challenge as well. The usual practice in response to all of these things in government has been to write a book. And books kind of look like this. This book is called Plan Bangalore. It will say you must take a regional view. It should identify who should do what. And it will say it must begin now. It must have the force of law. That is, it must be statutory, not just a bunch of recommendations. It must deliver value. It must measure progress regularly. And then just to be on the safe side, it'll have a lot of chapters. So why talk about only one thing? We'll have 27 chapters about what should be done in the city. And then this book will be put on a nice shelf, and it'll kind of remain there until the next book is written. And nobody will read this book, usually. I know this very well. I wrote this book. So in a way, I'm sure this is it's been an educational experience for people like me, RK, and a few others as well, right? Doing these sorts of things. There's a reason why this book doesn't get read by anybody or implemented or acted on by anybody. So we have no strategy for thinking from the book to the implementation. We have no manpower that is geared to take this and work with it, and so on and so forth. So I've sort of been, over the years, working with a different thesis. And asking this question, how do you think different, even if you have to cheat a little bit? How do you sort of come up with answers to the problems in ways that seem like at least the answers are possible rather than just wishful? And so we've come up with a bunch of things. And this is the overriding proposition that I work with. That the complexity and diversity of our problems is such that you can't just find the solutions and scale them. Instead, you have to increase the number of problem-solving people. And this is sort of, it lends itself to a lot of things. But it's a deliberate focus on saying, I'm going to try to increase the number of problem-solving people. And in the process, create an ecosystem of problem-solving in which more people have input about what should be done, at least in their own neighborhoods. And in fact, many, many things can be done. In this, I will talk more about technology and the smart city here and some of the work that we're doing in electronic city. After lunch, I'm speaking in the mobility session where I'll talk about all sorts of things that you can do in this model. The usual question that people ask is, yeah, but how much can ordinary citizens do? As it turns out, there's a phenomenal amount of stuff that ordinary citizens can do if you embrace that model. Some years ago, I'm going to rush through some parts of this because we're running short on time, thanks to our timekeeper here. Some years ago, I started pulling teledensity data from Airtel towers and started mapping congestion from them. Then in those days, BMTC used to have GPS units that worked. This must be the only city in the world that can look back at the future and say we used to have GPS units then, rather than and we could sort of get stuff from that. The police have cameras from which you can determine congestion by doing simple object counting exercises on top of each of those images. And if you put all these things together, you'll get this. It's an integrated view of live traffic conditions from different sources. And of course, you can add to this. You can add information from taxi fleets. You can add information from school buses and all sorts of other things that can populate data like this. But this sort of raises point number one about the smart city. A smart city needs to be able to see itself. Throughout the country, in problem after problem, we have not even created the capacity for the city to see itself. If you can't see the problem, you can't possibly solve it. And that's the first thing we need to give ourselves the capacity to, whether it's in housing, in water supply, in power, in area after area, we need to be able to see the problem. Then we started doing some fun stuff, started doing violation reports through SMS. I'll tell a little joke here. In the old days, the police used to have pieces of paper on which they would write down who committed violations. Not many people knew that that piece of paper had only 8 lines. And so one day I asked a constable, don't tell me in a whole day you write down these 8 lines by carrying this paper around with you or the whole day. Illa sir, sadharanavagi now lunchtime ku martivi. And I said, what do you mean you do this at lunchtime? I asked him, do you mean you can spot a few violations at lunchtime and do it? Because 8 minutes is all you need to spot 8 violations. You don't need a 12-hour shift or anything like that. But the guy would actually honest enough to say, no, mostly from memory I write down a few things and sort of send it to my kind of thing. And that had all kinds of problems. Without going, then there was a data entry operator, the computer will have a virus, it won't have network connection, there won't be power in the police station, all kinds of things would happen, and then they would send this sort of data to a Chalan server, which had database of various people and which vehicles were owned by various people. That database had an accuracy rate of about 3.5%. And by the time you generate a Chalan and send it to somebody, that guy will say, oh, something from the police, and toss it somewhere. And then finally, the compliance rate was about 0.5%. This month, the compliance rate is about 85%. And there's a reason. You move the system away from all its deficits and all its obstacles, and you can start to do things that are different from it. And many of you know about the BlackBerry-powered system that got introduced by BTRAC and went on to create India's first fully digital traffic police. And we did some asset management, in which we realized that one way of building a smart solution is to annoy people. Essentially, we set up a system by which if a signal went down in a certain area, the local ACP would get a message, and if it stayed down for a week and a half, the DCP would get a message. And if it stayed down for another week and a half, the police commissioner would get a message. And about 3 weeks after we put the system in place, at that time, M.N. Reddy was a traffic police commissioner, and he got something like 3,000 messages on his cell phone or something like that. And that actually is what led to reform of the system. People saying, this is just unacceptable, this level of the non-performance of things on the ground. We've mapped accident hotspots and converted them into areas of problems in the city, and got police stations to address some of them. In some parts of the city, you can see that they're doing junction improvements, trying to separate left turns from right turns and things like that. Those sorts of interventions came out of stuff like this. And out of all that, we built the Bangalore Transport Information System. And we even called it the Bangalore Transport Information System. Normally, if citizens build something, they tend to call it, after they call it Ashwin Mahesh or Mapunity or something like that. But we said quite deliberately, we should call this the Bangalore Transport Information System and create a large ecosystem in which people work together. And then we did this, which is an even more, this is an extraordinary thing, if you ask me, this traffic management center that we created. If I had told you that a traffic management center can be built in India without an external contract, nobody would believe it, right? That the traffic police themselves can build a world-class traffic management center. They may not have the manpower to run it, and they still don't even today. But it's possible for a government department to build a world-class traffic management center. This is the first version of it that we built in Ashok Nagar police station. And I'm extremely proud of the fact that every single person sitting in this room is a police constable. He's not from some major technology company. And we used a simple rule of thumb in this, which is to say that most of us might have highly skilled, competent jobs, but 70% of our jobs can be done by anybody with just 2 days of training. Right? I used to have a very high-skilled job at NASA for some years, and it struck me that as exciting as the job was, that a lot of that job could be done by anybody. A lot of that job was just punching keystrokes on a computer. And anybody could do that with just a little bit of training, which means that it's possible for a police constable equipped with the right tools and technologies to do 70% of what you can do with all the capabilities that you bring. We must embrace that rule as much as possible in governance. We did some ambulance enablement thing. The funny part is the police are ready to enable ambulances to come through the signals. The ambulances are unwilling to put the GPS or the applications on their devices. Some problems are actually not about governance. They're about society. Then we did the Big 10 bus. I'm not going to talk about the Big 10 bus. Many of you know about direction orientation and its success in Bangalore. Let's skip ahead to something, because I really do want, we did the number cycle program. This is the walkability stuff. Some of you, this is in the news now. This is an app that we built basically to say citizens can record encroachments themselves in public spaces on footpaths. This is now part of a public hearing that's going on in the High Court, where the courts are saying if the citizens can record all this data, why can't BBMP record this data? And it's very unfortunate, because the commissioner or some very high-ranking official will show up in court. The court will ask him some very embarrassing questions like, do you have any junior officials, or are you the junior most official? The court actually asked this. The court actually asked this question in the last hearing. Right? If you are the commissioner, you have to feel bad, because on the one hand, it's not all his fault. It's not all his fault. There are a set of things he can do, but the whole system is set up in such a way that the commissioner has to rely on all kinds of people providing input to him, usually his junior officials, and there's no system for collating all this together. So how did this happen? I have a certain theory of change, that IT can open up the way we do problem solving in cities, and recreate the commons and recreate this idea of problem solving by the people. I haven't even shown you many of the things that have been done in the city. The commuter rail program that Praja did was an extraordinary example of what ordinary citizens can do. There's a bunch of other stuff that's going on. The environment portal that we're now building, the public safety program that we're building, and the heritage platform that's been going on for a while. I'm not going to talk about this. Now I want to talk about electronic city, because I just wanted to give you that background as a way of saying, you can pull all kinds of stuff together if you decide that all of us are going to pull stuff together, not worry about who's doing what and what the economics of it and all of that stuff is. Electronic City is an interesting place. It's an independent township authority, and it's 800 acres. It's an $8 billion corporate cluster. 125,000 employees work there. 3,000 technology and management students are going to graduate school over there as well. You have all the resources needed in theory to put together a smart city platform. You have design and development companies. You have manufacturing of electronic components and sensors. You have testing capability, deployment capacities with system integrators, massive system integrators, management capacity, and even a certain amount of governance capacity coming out of corporate experiences in particular. But it's a well-regulated business district, you might think of it. And so what our thinking in Electronic City is that this is actually an easy place compared to a lot of municipal areas to put together a technology platform. But this would only be a success, in my view, if you did this in a way that can be taken beyond the municipal township authorities into actual municipalities. It's one thing to prove that something can be done in Lavasa or in Electronic City or in any sort of self-contained entity like that. But can we, so the question I really am intrigued by is to say, can we do this in a way that means that you can bring this to Bangalore tomorrow morning with 60% of it working, even if not all of it? So the goals sort of at a collective level that we're thinking about are to make Electronic City the smartest city in India. I know that 800 acres is not quite a city, but 125,000 people working is not a bad thing. Made in India at India price. And these are both things that the government of India has sort of recently been emphasizing in a great way. And I think we should look at this. It's one thing to bring the world's greatest technologies at global prices and install them in Bangalore. And you might end up paying serious money, $25 million, $50 million to do an installation. I remember a guy from the World Bank who showed up one day and asked me if I would support some of this technology development for some cities in Asia. And I asked him, how much money do you have for this thing? And he said, we have about $25 to $40 million per city. I said, for $25 to $40 million, you could get the basic installation set up in all 200 cities that you have under your jurisdiction. The thing is that when you start to think that cost is equal to capacity, you come up with a completely different model. The advantage of today's technologies is that this historical relationship between cost and robustness, between cost and models of public delivery have changed. And a lot more people can now create collective outcomes that are not possible through business models alone. And can we bring 15% of the global smart management, whether it's smart buildings or smart cities or any of those things, can we bring 15% of that business to India, in particular to Electronic City? This is the goal that we're looking at. And now I'm going to talk 2 slides about technology, because I know a lot of you are sort of coming from this perspective. The usual way of thinking of a smart city platform, I mean, you can sort of think of it like this: backbone infrastructure, wires, junction boxes, that sort of holds everything together. And then there are devices that are plugged into this backbone infrastructure. Sensors, cameras, air pollution sensors, any kind of sensor, any kind of monitoring technology, any kind of reporting technology, water meters, waste meters, all sorts of things. And then these devices report their data into something that needs to manage all of these devices together, a device management stack, as it were. Cisco has one called City Infrastructure Management. IBM has its own stack. Everybody has their own stack. And then from this device management technologies, you report devices that are coming from the data to listening services, web services. And these web services consume the data and give this data out to portals and front ends, an information system at the front end, an analytics program at the front end, a web application, a command center application, a mobile application. All these things are consumers of the web services that come from the device monitoring. By and large, around the world, if you look at anything that people call a smart solution, it will have roughly this contour. But there's a challenge. It looks actually like this. If you go to any city that has done more than one of this, the chances are that they have more than one deployment of it. They basically have a smart lighting solution and a smart transport solution, and the two of them don't leverage the same backbone. Which is all right in many cases because they've been done only as pilots, and so usually the cities are not really incurring massive expenditure on these just yet. But this is not a model that can work going forward. The idea that you'll build smart solutions for different domains separately, and that each one of them is somehow going to be smart, is fundamentally speaks against this logic of integration, which is a necessary part of smartness. So what can you do? I think what can be done at a high level, oh sorry, I didn't realize we lost that. Yeah, I'm not sure at what point we lost that. Did you see that? Yeah. And then that was that? Okay. And then I said, I think this is what we can do. I think that the city, at some level, every city must define and own in some way or the other. It need not physically own, it need not intellectually own, it need not business-wise own, but the city must define the core thing. The city must say that the device management technology and the web services technology that talk to the front ends, any front end, whether it's managers or citizens or consumers or anybody, these must be common. So it doesn't really matter if you're putting up a smart lighting solution or if you're putting a smart transport solution or smart energy solution, they will all report into the same device management technology. And the device management technology plus the web services will expose a common set of APIs for anybody to write on top of. The city for its application, individual application developers for anything that they want to do, device builders, even solution builders. All of these guys must have APIs on the left and APIs on the right. And if you put this together, you can create an ecosystem in which a lot more people can participate, with each doing their own thing. The other advantage of doing it this way is that you actually, my definition of a smart city includes one piece which is critical, which is that you should be able to be smart even if your city has not made the decision to be smart yet. Why should a smart city begin to be smart on the day the mayor decides or the government decides it's going to be a smart city? Your city should be smart because you're deciding to be smart. And therefore, this means that if you decide to adopt a smart building solution or a smart mobility solution for your campus, that should be possible even before the city makes that decision. And I think doing it this way will enable some of that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that's needed, but this will surely help. So this is a sort of a, it's not really a first look because the actual UIs are sort of changing as we speak. But the Electronic City Smart City platform is essentially it will be an integrated living lab kind of environment for multiple things that can be showcased together. Pollution monitoring, traffic, including both traffic movement and traffic counts and all those sorts of things. Energy at the building level and at the aggregate level, water consumption at the building level and at the aggregate level. Safety, a safety system that is both consumer facing and also actually has metrics for management, a waste management system, and a smart citizen kit that will come out of some partners. Cisco is sort of a very big part of doing some piece of this thing, and they are bringing some technologies that they've sort of implemented elsewhere in the world as well. But it'll also have other things. It will have a vendor registration platform so that empanelment of vendors can happen. It will have news and announcements from the township authority. It will have every form that is used by the township authority for whatever it is that the authority wants, that you want to do with the authority, and online processing of all of that, and the usual feedback, suggestions, and all of these things. We think something like this can make a nice beginning. There are two slides in conclusion that I want to draw your attention to. I think we can do the smart city platforms in India from the government side, but if they're not done with the public, they won't be smart. I'm reasonably confident of that. If the city of Visakhapatnam or the city of Jaipur is going to build a smart city platform and it's done from the government side without the public, it just can't be smart. It just will not. It's a fact of life. It needs to cover many domains. It can't be for any one domain in the city or even just 2, 3 domains. In fact, it should cover every domain and be open to go on adding domains as it comes along. It should be open to multiple devices and applications. The idea here is not to predetermine who should be the vendor, but to be able to say that the platform should self-evolve in a way that the most competitive vendors always feel welcome in providing the solution. We need to have quick examples of outcomes. It needs to be inexpensive. It can't be done at global cost in India. And ideally, it needs to meet this tripart combination of being both a social platform and a commercial platform and an administrative platform. If it achieves all of these 3 things together, you'll get a very nice outcome. I think that by about mid-December to late December, we should have an India platform. We will have, and what I mean by this India platform is a set of tools and platforms that can be quickly instanced for any city. In our current imagination, it should have at least the following 7 things. It should have data collection tools, both for citizens and for employees of cities. It should have a web application, naturally, a mobile application, a command center application, an open device management solution that people can use for services that they want. It should have a planning platform. And I didn't really talk much about planning in these things. There's an extraordinary amount of city planning that you can do with technology today. Even citizens can begin to be part of that in a way that was not possible a few years ago. And then you'll need APIs to everything. I believe that this is achievable in less than 6 weeks from where we are today. And I think if we put something like this out into public domain, a very large number of cities could come forward and say, this is a workable start for me. And therefore, we can work with this. A last point about innovation and cost. Too many things in this country are priced right at the beginning. In any society, if you price every little thing, that actually limits the number of people who can use that thing, and therefore it limits the number of people who can innovate by using that thing. So our hope is that we can build an India platform that at a base level is actually free, and invite lots more people to participate in it, to develop on top of it in a way that renders value. But for most basic information services and information management services on that platform, I think it's possible to make those things free with technologies that exist today. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions on this or anything else.
So we can take a couple of questions, and then the rest we can probably catch up over lunch, which is about to break soon.
Yeah.
So I will not keep everybody here while you think of lunch. So anyway, let's focus on a couple of questions.
Good morning, Dr. Mahesh. This morning we also had, Professor Subhash mentioned about the distrust between the government, who governs versus, who is governed, being governed. And you had mentioned an interesting point in increasing the number of problem-solving people. I think that together, brings a thought in my mind. This is more of like, thinking out loud kind of a thing. You can answer, whether I'm wrong or if it's already been evaluated. Like, is it possible in a way that, also a friend from HP had mentioned, is are we silently monitoring citizen activist groups in different part of the city?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, what if we put, connect the dots, and possibly, the government can take the initiative in monitoring certain, people or activists who is currently spread out and focusing their energy on one particular thing or like, certain very specific aspects, and then, maybe send out an open invite for setting up a delivery arm of the government, like a non-profit or a grassroots, where the government itself cannot be there in every place. But they can, pick, maybe apply 2 applicants or 3 just to make sure that it's being fair. So kind of, spread out.
So let me respond to
Sure.
the canvas. I get the drift of your question, even if not exact. 2 things. The government is not going to do this. You can be sure of that. Because if the government did this, it would change overnight. The kind of people who run the government today have no interest in doing these sorts of things. I'm not saying that everybody is uniformly crooked, but look at the reality. People talk about digitization of property records in Bangalore. Only 60% of the people are paying property tax. So obviously it's been done in a way that makes the technology look as though it has achieved something, but it's allowed the political economy to continue. Right? Half the records in the RTO database are still wrong. So the technology can create some apparent solutions to some of these things, but it's not actually going to fix the problem. So it's not about the government doing something. If you want to do it, I think you should say, how can I do this in my neighborhood, and how can I get 6 more people to do similar things in other neighborhoods? You can build social technology that can enable, I'd be happy to give you 3 platforms that you can start using in your own neighborhood, and you can start doing these kinds of things. So the imagination of this thing cannot come from the government, because the government's imagination of this is going to be administrative. It's not going to be social. Whereas the problem is fundamentally social and political, number 1. The second thing is that we need to remember, it's a part of it is the problem with history. Most people think of 1947 as Independence Day, Independence year, and then also the government of India was formed in 1947 or 1950, between 47 and 50, and most people think of establishing government as a one-time activity. But you got to think like you're in 1947. You got to think there is no government of India. We now have the responsibility of thinking, what should the government of India look like? What should the government of Karnataka look like? What should the government of Bangalore look like? So you need to ask yourself that if you had the opportunity to constantly reimagine and improve government, how would you set it up today? And give yourself the necessary freedom to go forward in that direction. I mean, that's not the same thing as a revolution, but it certainly should not limit you. Keep in mind, it was only in the 1990s that local government even came into being in India. Until 1991 and 1992, there was no such thing as local government. Therefore, there is room in the Constitution and in the law for constant reassessment of what government itself should be. And we have to think like that. What do you want the ward committees to do? Well, how do you want the budget to be set up? How do you want to decide where the buses should run and who should run the buses? You should ask these questions as though you have the latitude and the luxury of imagining government for the first time. Okay.
I think in interest of time, we'll probably limit the questions here, but we are about to break for lunch, so then you can continue to have the conversation. Thank you so much, Ashwin, for the really riveting conversation on a presentation around what we can do as citizens and the technologies that are available. I would have further follow-up questions for you
Yeah.
separately.
I'm sure.
So we would want to have Nat
Oh.
hand out a little memento as a vote of thanks. So at this point, we are